Welcome to a series of narrations from this book, Indian Sleepman Tales, Legends of the Otoe Tribe, written by Bernice G Anderson. This is a collection of authentic legends of the Otoe Tribe. This is published in 1965 and renewed in 1967 by the Caston Printers Ltd. At the time that this story was written, it was noted that the four boys in the story, Sunlight, Spotted Tail, Surprise, and Sharp Claws, were grown men now, living with their families on the Otoe Reservation. It was also noted that Chief Miwesa was the last active head chief of the Otoe tribe, and at his death, Sunlight, his eldest son, will become chief, but only in name. At the time this book was written, this was a picture of Chief Take Blanket Away, who is the last active head chief of the Otoe tribe, as he had suffered a stroke and was paralyzed. I will apologize for mispronouncing any of the words ahead of time. Chapter 1, House Stories. Yawa Shiga, a voice as clear-toned as village announcer's bell, sounded from the head chief's painted teepee. Yawa Shiga. The voice ascended musically, and this time Circling Eagle, the slim wife of Chief Take Blanket Away, stood in the doorway of the teepee, the fringes of her white doe-skin dress skipping in the wind, her long braided black hair blowing back from her shoulders. The wind sang in a baritone voice. A red leaf scuttled to the ground. As the woman stepped outside to call again, the rows of shining white elk teeth and tiny painted shells ornamenting her dress chimed rhythmically. The music of her voice, the music of the wind, the music of the chiming ornaments blended in autumn harmony. The cold maker will bring the snow season to our village before many sleeps, Circling Eagle remarked to the pipe man, who had lifted the flap of the teepee to look out. Toja Almeida, the north wind, is announcing its very dusk hour. Quickly she moved towards the fire which the bellows of the wind had fanned into life. As she did so, her headband and her strings of beads and metal bracelets snatched the reflection of the flames and changed her into a fire princess there in the autumn dusk, or so the pipe man thought as he looked at her. Yawa Shiga, Circling Eagle called again, and this time her voice reached the ears of four shouting, scrambling boys who were playing the game of Coyote in the Ring with other boys of the Otoe village. Sunlight, the eldest son of Circling Eagle and Chief Take Blanket Away, was in the act of beating the howling coyote with a stick. But he paused for a moment, the stick uplifted to wave a signal to his mother. As soon as he could attract their attention, he motioned to Spotting Tail and Surprise and Sharp Claws to start with him toward the teepee. Surprise, who happened to be the coyote receiving the beating, was ready to quit, but the other boys were reluctant to leave the game. The four brothers knew that Yawa Shiga meant someone is coming, and that this mysterious someone was no other than Putuyo, the sleep man. They might have been tempted to ignore their mother's summons had they not known that storytelling time always preceded the arrival of this otherwise unwelcome person. But with a boisterous good sleep, two playmates who were already starting towards their own lodges, the Scachile game was ended for that evening. In the exact center of the circle village, facing the place of the sunrise, the head chief's teepee stood like a blanketed giant chief, its scarlet, blue, and bright yellow painted symbols dimmed by nightfall. Circling Eagle was replenishing the lodge fire when her sons came running in. A gray banner of smoke sought the outlet at the peak of the lodge, and the flames set the rhythm for wild shadows danced upon the walls. "Look," Spotted Tail shouted, "the shadow dance has begun." The boys gave a war whoop and at once began to cause their shadows to perform grotesque antics. "Yawa Shiga," Circling Eagle reminded them as she seated herself beside the fire and took up her basketry. "The sleep man will put you to sleep standing up, and how will you like that?" The boys settled at once beside the fire and turned expectant faces toward their tall chieftain father. "What is the first story to be?" asked Sharp Claws, ever the most eager of the boys to hear what he always called the house stories. Laying aside his dyes made from sumac and blueberries and colored soil which he had been painting symbols of the Bear clan upon the teepee walls, Chief Take Blanket Away filled his long pipe with tobacco from the little beaded sack at his belt. He stood smiling down upon his youngest son. Sharp Claws looked up at him and returned the smile shyly. "Tell us how Majem, nay, the little white rabbit, got his pink eyes, won't you?" he urged in almost a whisper, for he stood in some awe of his father, who knew so many things and who looked so magnificent on special occasions in his beaded garments and long feathered war bonnet. The big chief of the Bear clan puffed long puffs on his pipe. He stood listening for a moment to the small sounds of the night, the sleep tune of the cricket, the shivery voice of Makoji, the screech owl, the lullaby croon of the little stream where the bullfrog twanged at the rising moon, while shaggy darkness stole, cat-like, around the teepee and crept inside to lie in the far corners where the firelight had failed to reach. Then he seated himself at the opposite side of the fire. "Ho," he began, "so you want to hear again how Majem, the little white rabbit, got his pink eyes, do you? Well then. Many moons and many moons ago, a little white rabbit lived in the woods with his grandmother rabbit. One sun, while the grandmother was in her garden gathering cabbage and carrots and turnips for the noon meal, Majem ran away. He ran far into the woods where the shadows made a blue and purple jungle, and where the treetops gave queer whispering noises. At first these sounds frightened the little white rabbit, and in order to escape from them he sped along briskly as a tumbleweed can travel across our wide prairie in front of the wind. But the deeper he went into the woods, the more whisperings he heard. The more whisperings he heard, the more briskly he ran. Finally, a few words caught his attention, and he paused to listen. "He is a swift runner, that rabbit," came a distinct voice from the strongest oak tree. "He is, indeed," replied the chief of the hackleberry trees. "Ho," thought Majem as he bellowed his chest. "So that is what they have been saying. I might have known it all along." After that he ran on hurricane feet. "Ho," he said again, "this is easy. Perhaps I can outrun Chief One-Eye." One-Eye was the head chief of the tribe of white rabbits. His record as a runner had never yet been broken. The vain little white rabbit decided to try to fool his grandmother, for he knew that she had always wanted him to pattern his life after the life of this great chief. When he neared a wild plum thicket, he plucked out one of his eyes as if he were plucking a wild plum. Then he hid it in the thicket and ran to his grandmother's garden. He entered like a tornado. His grandmother screeched in that high-pitched voice rabbits have and started to run. But when she saw his one eye, she wheeled about and bowed very low. She addressed him as Chief One Eye, and Majin Ni bellowed his chest again. He chatted while with his grandmother rabbit and tried not to smile over the trick he was playing on her. When he loped back to the wild plum thicket and he had put his eye back into his socket, he returned very leisurely to his grandmother's garden and listened to the old rabbit's account to the supposed visit of swift Chief One Eye. The little fellow was so elated over the success of his trick that he could not resist the fun of trying it again the next day. While his grandmother was in her garden gathering cabbage and carrots and turnips for the noon meal, he again loped out into the wild plum thicket, and after plucking out his eye as if he were plucking out a wild plum, he hid it in the thicket and he ran swiftly and ever more swiftly to his grandmother's garden. The grandmother rabbit felt honored at receiving a second visit from the rabbit whom she thought was the one-eyed chief, and she humbly offered him a bowl of crushed ripe berries to eat. The berries tasted so delicious that Majin Ni was having such fun that he remained longer than he realized, and when he returned to the wild plum thicket to replace his eye, he found that he had left it out so long that it had become cold. Pains like thorn pricks stabbed him after he put the eye back into its socket. He rubbed it with his paws, but it served only to make the pain greater. The little white rabbit ran whimpering back to his grandmother. His head throbbed, and throb was in his voice as he begged her to put the poultice of herbs upon his eye. "Dear, dear, how very pink your eye is!" the grandmother rabbit exclaimed as she did all she could to relieve the pain. "If your grandfather were only here, he could make this eye well with his magic, for he was a medicine man of great power." But the grandfather had been in the happy hunting ground, the land of the spirits, for many moons and many moons, and so he could not help his little grandson. The herb poultice which his grandmother applied took away the pain, but the pink color remained, and the other eye turned pink to match it. That is how the first white rabbit got its pink eyes. All of his descendants have had pink eyes too, as you know. What a wonderful tale about how the white rabbits got their pink eyes. I hope everybody enjoyed these tales, and I am going to go ahead and do more stories from this book. And if you like this, please hit the like button, comment below, share these stories, and if you haven't already subscribed, please do that. And I thank everybody here for their support. Bye-bye.